we're going to talk a little bit about asset forfeiture. Let's say this globe is yours. You paid for it. It belongs to you. Under our system of government, where we live in a capitalist system, once you own something, it's yours. I could never take it.
I have property rights.
Yeah, you have property rights, and those property rights were extended to you by the Constitution. The Fifth Amendment says that the government can't take your property without just compensation.
But I know that happens all the time, so how's that going down?
And now, so you're setting this, you're teeing this up for me, aren't you? So this is your globe, and let's assume that this globe, you bought it after you were involved in a drug transaction. So this globe is the proceeds of crime. Or let's say this globe is a car, and you used the car to engage in a drug transaction. You know what I can do? I can take this globe away from you, and you say, where's my money? And I say to you, as the government, you don't get to have money because I am forfeiting your asset. And you say, what about the Constitution? What about the Fifth Amendment? And I say to you, look to Congress. Congress has carved out an exception in asset forfeiture that means that the government gets to take your stuff without just compensation because you committed a crime in order to acquire that asset. I'm going to give you your globe back now that the example is over. But that's basically what asset forfeiture is. The government and
then I got to go hire an attorney like you to get my stuff back.
And then you have to come and get an attorney like me to get your things back. And there are defenses to asset forfeiture. And I will tell you that from a political perspective, the government used to be able to cut a very wide swath, Paul, with regard to forfeiture.
So, you know, this brings up an interesting point, and I know one of our viewers has a great question. You know, the cops pull someone over on the highway in Nevada. It's at 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh, sir, step out of the car. We think we suspect that you're driving drunk. Okay, the guy gets out of the car. Now they're looking in there, and all of a sudden, and the guy's not drunk. They spot, let's say, $50,000, and they take that money. Does the government get to keep that money?
Well, that leads to a. It depends, I guess. That's always the legal answer.
That's a very lawyer answer.
That's a very lawyerly answer. If, in fact, the cop had no right to stop the car in the first place, it very well may be that you could get your money back. There's also the issue of whether the cop, where the asset was. You said it was $50,000, right?
Yeah, just say it's 50 or 100. I mean, there was a case here in Nevada where a gentleman was pulled over, and subsequently it was shown that the reason the cop pulled him over was just not warranted or justified. There was no probable cause, as lawyers like to say, or judges like to use that terminology.
Pretextual.
Pretextual.
That's what we like to say.
But there was a suspicion that he had a lot of money. Now, they never could show that there was drug trafficking proceeds or anything, but the government kept the money. And that's become, you know, in Texas, there's been a lot of investigative reports of small towns that will pull drivers over, and especially a lot of minority drivers, and keep their things just because they've suspected that they, you know, come up with some trumped up reason to pull someone over. And then all of a sudden now these municipalities making millions of dollars collecting items that they're seizing from people who may or may not have been pulled over properly.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the political dynamics of forfeiture, because the pendulum has been swinging in one direction for a number of years, in fact for decades, where the government was just seizing right and left.
Right.
And within the last 5 to 10 years, I would say, both Congress and the courts have taken notice of that, and they've drawn back on forfeiture. So this guy, let's go back to your example of the guy who got stopped with the $50,000. Of course, every lawyer is going to say, like I've said, it depends. Every case is fact specific. But the way in which you've presented the facts now, and I know you're painting with a very broad brush, Paul. No, the government doesn't get to keep that money. There has to be a nexus, some sort of nexus. There has to be some sort of cause and effect, just like there is in everything to life. You know, I sort of said very broadly the government just gets to take your asset. But there has to be, as there is in every case, a factual basis. And therefore there can be a trial to make that determination as to whether there are sufficient facts to establish a preponderance of the evidence in a civil case and a beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal case. Now, I don't want to get in too much into the weeds. Maybe we can do that on another session about the distinction between the standards and burdens of proof between criminal cases and civil cases. But to answer your question, again, a long-winded lawyerly way of saying, no, the government just doesn't get to keep it. I mean, they don't hold the role of a king. You know, O King George in England were the reason why everybody
that's why we had a revolution.
That's why we all came over here. The king got to do that.
Right.
Okay, but fortunately, in this country, there are rules that the government has to honor and observe in order to take your assets. And there has been a real big rollback of people who have had their assets taken by the government, where the courts, especially in Nevada, and Congress as well, are looking at forfeiture with a much more critical eye.